Good evening, and thank you for joining. Welcome to lesson number 24 of Practical English, the ongoing online lecture series. My name is Darcy, and I'm teaching out of the Zhongnan Center of Leiwen English based in Nantong, Jiangsu. Tonight's topic is American government. Part of the ongoing American geography series. At the end of the lesson, I'll be providing a link to our WeChat study group for you to join, where you can get more information on previous lessons. Tonight, based on this topic, tonight we want to continue to explore the geography and political history of the United States of America. As I said, it's part of the ongoing series, and I would recommend that you watch Lesson 19, American Landmarks. In particular tonight, we will be reviewing some information previously covered about the history foundation of America, from its discovery up until mid-20th century, about the 1950s. And we'll also be looking at the structure of the American governmental system. I think it's an interesting topic to look at this particular time as we draw closer to November, which will be the next American election. So we are in sort of the election campaign season right now, and the closer we get to the date, I think the more hype and excitement we will see focusing on American politics. And in my conversations with students at our center, many students don't really have a very good understanding of the American political system. So that's why I'd like to talk about that tonight. In addition to that, we'll also be looking at 20 of America's most influentially historic presidents. This is the worksheet that I sent to the study group. 24 vocabulary terms relevant to this subject area. Politics, not just American politics, but politics in general, politics and government. Down below you can see a diagram showing the division of power. In other words, the American government is structured into three branches, both in the state and federal level, the national government and the local state level. Each state has this political structure or division of power, and then it works at the federal level as well. You can see three houses or three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. So we're going to learn some of these terms. The first word on this worksheet is advocate. And to advocate simply means to argue in favor of an idea or a proposal. Martin Luther King, the great civil rights advocate, the black civil rights advocate, became a historic figure for his political campaigning, his activism, his speeches advocating for equal rights for black Americans and harmony and cooperation among all Americans. Agency. An agency Well, in this lesson, we're talking about branches of government: the judicial, legislative, and executive, and these are part of the government. But the government also has separate agencies or independent agencies. So these are bodies of these are governmental bodies that are tasked with a particular function. For example, the Food and Drug Agency, the FDA, is an agency, a governmental agency, responsible for or tasked with the responsibility of regulating the safety and quality of food sold on the market and drugs sold on the market. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, is another governmental agency that is responsible for regulating the standards and enforcing environmental protection, regulating standards of pollution emissions and environmental protection. An amendment, to amend, is to add to slightly modify, and we'll look at the Bill of Rights, the constitutional amendments in this lesson. The amendments are very important. The Bill of Rights, Americans are always talking about the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. These were rights added to the Constitution, which is the highest law in the land, added to it as the United States government, as the nation of the United States of America grew. The founding fathers, the politicians, those that were, instrumental in setting the course that America would follow, were very keen politically, ideologically, on strengthening rights and freedoms to citizens, individuals, and controlling or restricting powers held by government. So that's what Americans are talking about when they are referencing the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. That's the Bill of Rights. To appoint in government or in any governing body, typically leaders are appointed into positions of power. You can have an election where a group of people elect a leader, and then you can have the leader then appoint his or her cabinet members. The leader can appoint people to work in different heads of different departments. Authority, power granted by law, basically. A colony. The British Empire was at one point the largest empire in the world, and they had control over Canada, the United States, or what is now Canada and the United States, used to be under control by Britain, as well as Australia, India, parts of Africa, South Africa especially. These were colonies. The early states were British colonies, as well as French colonies and Spanish colonies. Congress. You have the legislature, or the legislative branch, where Congress works. Congress is one of those governmental bodies, one of those governmental branches where new laws are proposed, how the Treasury should be budgeted towards social programs and defense programs and infrastructure programs. So that's what Congress is supposed to do. The Constitution. So the Constitution is a document. Most countries have a constitution, perhaps all. most countries consider themselves, most modern day nation states consider themselves to be democratic republics, or republics of some form or fashion. And in order to be a republic is where you have governmental officials or leaders appointed into their positions of authority on the provision that they follow the rule of law. And, leaders can create their own laws if they want to. But in a republic, leaders, the government is restricted from passing laws that go against the Constitution. And if there is a leader, or sort of like a rogue party, a renegade party, I guess, that goes against the Constitution, the international community can delegitimize that political party, basically, and say that they're not following the Constitution of the nation. Therefore, the nation is not recognized by the international community. I'm not going to really talk about that, but that's how the Constitution holds weight, basically. A lot of this came into popularity after the Second World War. First and Second World War, the international community, the United Nations, the League of Nations, all of these representatives of different nations needed to find a way for the international community to maintain peace and stability in the world. An election is where you have the citizens or the members of some organization decide on a leader, basically. The executive, you can see in the diagram below, the executive branch is one of the branches of government where the president sits with the vice president. We'll get into that later on. The executive is, think of the top management. A federation, particularly in the United States, Canada, I think Russia, these very large countries, you have territories or provinces or states independently governed, but then they are working in cooperation with each other under a federation, basically. The way the United States was founded, each state had to form its own government before it could then be accepted into the union or the federation of states. So a federation is an amalgamation or a group of states cooperating under one nation state, federal government, a federation. Ideology, political belief, implement. This is a word commonly used in political and business discussions. Top management, or the government is responsible for long-term planning, basically, and carrying out the plans given before. So, proposing a new law is one stage of the long-term planning, and then implementing how that law will be carried out to set in motion a plan. Legislature, one of the branches of government. We have the judicial, executive, and legislature. So we'll talk about that in greater detail later on. Liberty, another word for freedom. Freedom granted to citizens. The liberty, citizens are granted inalienable rights and freedoms to live out their lives as they choose, without governmental, without laws and governmental bodies restricting how they live their life. Basically, it's the idea of liberty. It can be more clearly understood. Those who live under liberty, or a nation that supports liberty, are free from arbitrary detention. So before anybody can be sentenced and convicted to go to prison, they have to stand trial before a court of their peers, a judge and a jury. And they are given opportunities to defend themselves, to defend their innocence, basically. That's the idea of liberty, that citizens are free from arbitrary arrest, and they can defend themselves in a court. A nation, another word for a country, sort of a legal term. Petition, to petition, again in a democratic republic, citizens in theory have the right to influence decisions made in government. Like, citizens can petition their state representatives working in Congress to pass a law or to authorize some budget so that they can improve their conditions, basically. If some city is having some difficulties, they can petition government to rectify the problem through money, or through passing a law, or repealing a law. Maybe a law isn't working and they can just cancel the law. They can petition to repeal the law. Policy, another word for plan. Ratify, the executive branch, the president, doesn't create laws. That's the responsibility of the legislature. So again, in the legislature, the House of Congress and Senate, in the House of Congress, or the House of Representatives or Congress, you have the state representatives discussing new laws that need to be passed. And then those laws, once they are proposed and passed and written up, they go to the executive, and the president signs them into law. The laws proposed and passed by legislator don't become law until the president ratifies it. So to ratify means to have the president sign and approve the law. As well as in international law, you can have international laws ratified by a group of nations. That's a treaty, as you can see down below, a treaty. Peace treaty, for example. I believe that we had a peace treaty signed between the United Arab Emirates and Israel this week. So these nations signed a treaty. They ratified some agreement that they would no longer engage in espionage and different forms of conflict. They would agree to normalize diplomatic relations, and this would make diplomacy much easier for these countries. All of these laws would be all of these laws preventing diplomacy and policies of hostility, sanctions, for example, were nullified or canceled. I'm not sure of the details of that yet, but that's what an example of a peace treaty is, and how different nations, heads of state, ratify these treaties. They also ratify laws in their own countries, their own nations. Talked about what a republic is, and we'll talk about it later. The Senate is one of those houses in one of those groups in the legislature, and vote. Okay, moving on. So we'll be talking about the history of America from its discovery for the first part of this lesson. The second part, we'll be looking at the way that the American government is structured and define some of the terminology as we go. And then we will be also looking at some of America's most famous presidents in history. So here we go. Try to read along. As always, I'll have these slides sent to the study group after the lesson is recorded. Okay? So America is the third largest country in the world, second to Canada and Russia, and only marginally larger than China, at 9.8 million square kilometers. The American territory includes 48 contiguous continental states. So within the continental America, you have 48 states. There's 50 in total. America is the country situated in North America between Mexico and Canada. America purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867, and that's that orange state to the northwest of Canada, the green country, as well as Hawaii, which was conquered and annexed from the Spanish in 1898. As of 2019, America has a population of 328 million people, making it the third most populous country per capita next to China and India. The capital city is Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a city and a federal district that does not belong to any state. In other words, the people that reside in the city of Washington, I believe, do not have a state representative. They can vote to elect a president, but they don't have a state representative. They don't have a member in the House of Congress. The largest city is New York City. Some of the physical geographical features of America include the great mountain ranges of the Appalachians in the east and the Rocky Mountains in the west. The Mississippi River is America's largest river. Southern states such as Texas, Arizona, and California are very hot with desert plains. So one of the things that makes America such a great country is its physical geography, or its physical land features: mountains, rivers, lakes, hot climate in the south, and cooler temperate climates in the north, and a whole range of wildlife and plant life. Okay, so the original inhabitants, the First Nations people, America was originally populated by Paleo-Indians who migrated from Siberia, estimated 12,000 years ago, known today as the First Nations people. And many of the states and cities in America, as well as Canada, take their names from the First Nations, people that gave names to those places. European colonization began in the 16th century or the 1500s by countries including Spain, France, to some extent Germany and the Netherlands, and England. Here we see a map of the original 13 colonies. And then the territories to the west of that were French and Spanish. Originally, there were 13 colonies situated along the eastern coast of the Atlantic Ocean. The original colonies were Delaware, Georgia, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, and Virginia. American rebels proclaimed independence from Europe, predominantly England, during the Revolutionary War from 1775 until 1783. 1776 is celebrated as the year America came into being as its own nation. And General George Washington became America's first president in 1789. After the War of Independence, the Revolutionary War, and the government was established by people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others. They set about the mission of expanding territories through military conquest, as well as having settlements form into states. So we can see here the pink, and the pink is what used to be what was the first United States territory. And then this green was the Louisiana, which was controlled by the French. And then the yellow and the gray, which were controlled by the Spanish, were either taken by conquest or through diplomacy into the United States. Much of the continent was under control of the French and the Spanish. Some states, for example Texas, considered themselves to be independent republics, nations unto themselves. After many years of conquest and treaty agreements, America came to include the territory spanning all the way from the eastern coast of the Pacific to the western coast. Eastern coast of the Atlantic to the western coast of the Pacific. And then you have this this line called the 49th parallel that later became Canada, and Mexico to the south. This is the Civil War. The Civil War took place between 1861 and 65. The Southern Confederate States, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina attempted to secede or break from the Union. Northern Union states, under the leadership of the Republican President Abraham Lincoln, defeated the Confederacy, and as a result, laws that abolished slavery were passed. Oh, we forgot to mention what slavery was. Slavery. Well, during the period of colonization, during the colonial years, when you had the European powers, England, Spain, and France, to some extent Portugal, these nations had strong navies, strong sea vessels that could go out and explore and bring soldiers and conquer the uncivilized world, or the non-European world, I guess, Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, right? They set up these colonies, and they wanted to build new nations, or they wanted to build colonies that could supply the nations with resources and Um, they could expand their wealth that way. But they needed labor in order to do that. So it was a common practice back in those days to people, purchase people as slaves. Conquered people became indentured workers to masters, basically. And so slaves were brought in by the British, by the Spanish, I think, perhaps by the French too, and they went to work on farms, um, picking cotton and just doing the hard labor. At a certain point, after America as a nation was founded, the founding fathers wanted to abolish slavery, but those that profited the most from slaves, the southern states, would not willingly do that. So they had to fight a war in order to do that. And then we just, fast forward through history after the Great Civil War. America, just grew and developed. It then got involved in the First and Second World Wars, and this put it into its status as a superpower in the world. America harnesses the power of industry to build the world's most powerful army, lending support to during the First and Second World Wars in Europe. First World War 1914 to 1919, Second World War 1941 to 1945. America was the first and only country to use the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, ending the war and bringing the world into a new bipolar world order. Sorry. Okay, so let's watch this video here. Timeline of American history from the very beginning up until the present day, and I will be narrating through it. So here we see in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed to the New World in search of a western route to Asia. We also had the Spanish as the first colonial power to come in and take over the continent of South America. And so all of this yellow territory was New Spain. And people still speak Spanish in these parts to this day. You see the Caribbean islands and Cuba, Mexico, and Central America. So here it says that the English built up their navies, and Spain had an armada, or a fleet of ships that would prevent the English navy from sailing towards America. So anyway, the English were able to break through the Spanish armada and make way to the New World, make way to America. So the first colony that the English set up was Jamestown. A lot of the settlers coming into America were refugees or pilgrims seeking to escape from religious persecution in Europe. So the formation of the original 13 colonies in 1600. This is a period of war with the First Nations people, the Native Americans. So the settlers are beginning to rebel against the colonial government. And happening at the same time in Europe, you have the Enlightenment philosophies, the scientific revolution beginning, and the ideas or ideologies of freedom and liberty are taking hold in European nations, and this is taking place in America as well, where nations, people are people want to break away from. You have to remember that England and France and Spain were under monarchies at this time, under rule by king and queen, and so you had these revolutionary movements against monarchical governmental systems. in favor of democratic ones. So John Locke was one of those Enlightenment writers. This blue area is New France. Controls most of from Louisiana all the way up into Canada. And that area to the north east is what's called Quebec, which is still French speaking today. So this is the Tea Party, and that revolutionary spirit is just gaining more popularity and momentum among the people, and people are the colonial settlers are discontent or dissatisfied with the the taxes that they have to pay to England. They feel that they're not profiting from their work, supplying resources and selling them to England and then paying tax. So this is the beginning of the American War of Independence. And of course, there is pushback from the British, punishing rebels, punishing people quite inhumanely to set examples to quell discontent. So here it says the rebellion was originally to fight for more rights and representation within the British government, but it eventually turned into a war of independence, 1775 to 1783. Famous painting of George Washington here. In 1776, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So the Articles of Confederation was the first constitution, called the Articles of Confederation, precursor to the Constitution. I believe there were people within the colonies that did not agree with the Articles of Confederation. They were not willing to join this union. They wanted to become their own independent republics. So 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed and the Revolutionary War. And then in 1789, the Constitution and Bill of Rights was written up and ratified by the new government. And it was very well received. It was a very popular document, very popular move. People were very excited about the hope and the promise of the Constitution. So there was a war with the French and the British Loyalists, the War of 1812, as well as the Mexican War. And America was trying to take over the entire continent, but they had too much resistance in the north by the French and the British Loyalists, as well as the First Nations, and they had some resistance in the south as well. But they were able to conquer that land in between from the Spanish. Here we see Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, and 1861 to 1865. So, the movement for liberty and equality of rights among all people, among all men, was that movement was being carried on by certain individuals. So Frederick Douglass was an educated and emancipated slave. Basically, he was set free by his master, so to speak, and he was very well educated, and he wrote essays or manifestos to awaken black slaves. And then you have Abraham Lincoln, who was sympathetic to their emancipation as well. So here it says 1861 to 1865, the Civil War. America fought a war against itself, basically the northern states against the southern states over the issue of abolishment of slavery. What followed was after the Union States won the Civil War against the Confederate States, there was still the work to be done of enforcing laws of anti-discrimination against blacks, free slaves, and also giving them um, reparations or land. These people had no wealth at all, and so the government agreed to give them land to farm and support systems of support to help them, start their own independent lives. And of course, there were lots of skirmishes among rebel states that wouldn't easily go along with that. America had oil and gold and copper and iron, and so America became a very wealthy nation. Pursuing after this, another war with Spain. So with the great accumulation of wealth, you had the disparity of wealth distribution, and a small class of elites were gaining all the wealth off of the hard work of the working class. And so this is called the Progressive Era, where American government is trying to enact new laws enact new laws and create social programs to support working class citizens. The Progressive Era. America enters into World War I. So now we're in the 20th century, and you have all of these new technological innovations, such as recorded music, the motion picture, I guess, cinema, and the new image of America comes in, embracing modern music and sort of social movements. Also, America's industries were strengthened, or they grew under as a result of the First World War. But then it was quickly followed by a depression. So a stock market crash in 1929 brought America into the worst economic depression in history. And that lasted for 10 years. This is Franklin Roosevelt, again using progressive reforms and economic programs to try to restart the American economy, basically nationalizing industries and setting about these government works programs, building national parks and monuments and factories in an attempt to correct America's economic depression. Okay, and then this is the Second World War in Europe, 1941 to 1945. And America did not want to get involved into the Second World War until after Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor. And we'll finish it up here. What followed from that period, the end of the Second World War, to the 1990s was the Cold War. The Cold War ended with Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signing I believe, an armistice treaty. Okay, ending the Cold War. So here are the 50 states and their capital cities. Wow, it's already 8 o'clock. Maine, capital city Augusta. New Hampshire, Concord. Massachusetts, Boston. Rhode Island, Providence. Connecticut, Hartford. New York, New Jersey, Trenton. Delaware, it's hard to see, Dover, Maryland, Annapolis, Washington, D.C., Richmond, Virginia, North Carolina, Raleigh, South Carolina, Columbia, Atlanta, Georgia, Tallahassee, Florida, Montgomery, Alabama, Nashville, Tennessee, Frankfort, Kentucky, Columbia, Ohio, Lansing, Michigan, Indianapolis, Indiana, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jefferson City, Missouri, Little Rock, Arkansas, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Austin, Texas, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Topeka, Kansas, Lincoln, Nebraska, Des Moines, Iowa, St. Paul, Minnesota, Pierre, South Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota, Helena, Montana, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Denver, Colorado, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Phoenix, Arizona, Salt Lake City, Utah, Boise, Idaho, Sacramento, California, Carson City, Nevada, Salem, Oregon, and Olympia, Washington. Perhaps in future lessons we'll look at these cities in some detail. This slide here shows, the what we call the integration of states in chronology. So the first 13 states were Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Virginia, New York, and North Carolina, and Rhode Island. And then these other states came in later years, between 1787, beginning in 1787 and finally completing in 1959. Alaska and Hawaii were recognized as states in 1959. So you can look at this slide when I send it out later. So let's talk about the structure of the American government here. The United States is a federal republic of 50 states, a federal district, 5 territories, and several uninhabited island possessions. I think Panama might be one of them. It could become a state someday, maybe. It is the world's oldest surviving federation. It is a federal republic and a representative democracy in which majority rule is tempered by minority rights protected by law. What does that mean? So a republic is a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives. In other words, representatives are elected into government and they serve a fixed term, and then when their term is up, they either run for re-election or they nominate their successor. So this is what's happening right now in America. The president is running for a second term. Nobody within that party has nominated any other kind of incumbents, so the party is behind Donald Trump as the incumbent, at least for this term. And then you had those Democratic debates where the members of the Democratic Party were campaigning for the nomination for leadership of the party. And then what happens in November is the people will vote for the party that they and the leader that they want to support. But they don't vote for a leader until that leader has been kind of nominated by their party as the running candidate. And so these politicians or these representatives, they campaign, and then they get nomination, and then the people can vote for them. And then they serve out a fixed term, and when their term is up, they then nominate the successor or the next incumbent. A federation is a group of states with a central government, but independence in internal affairs, and that's important. So it's a group of states, but each state has its own independent powers. The government is regulated by a system of checks and balances defined by the U.S. Constitution, which serves as the country's supreme legal document. The original text of the Constitution establishes the structure and responsibilities of the federal government and its relationship to the states. So again, when we saw in that video the Articles of Confederation, the original sort of founding document, the states, the colonies that then became states were their own republics. The Republic of New Hampshire, the Republic of Delaware, the Republic of Virginia, and so on, right? South Carolina or whatever. They were part of the. They were signed into the Articles of Confederation, but they were not happy with it, and so they worked on building a better document, which was the Constitution. And when the Constitution was signed, then you had all of this sort of unanimous support for the Federation of States. Now, one of the articles of the Constitution is habeas corpus. Basically, habeas corpus protects citizens to challenge unlawful arrest. If somebody has been wrongfully accused and arrested, they may petition the government to be released from prison. And then we have the Bill of Rights. The Constitution has been amended 27 times. The first 10 amendments make up the Bill of Rights. So again, after the Civil War, I believe the Constitution was amended to give blacks voting rights and rights to property. And much later on, women were given voting rights, as well as the right to equal treatment in all other areas. Basically, it took a nationwide sort of constitutional amendment. I'm not sure how that works, but it's very time intensive. It takes a lot of political work to change the Constitution. But when it is changed, it's something is added into it, an amendment, basically. The Bill of Rights is a legal document intended to guarantee citizen rights and legal protections in addition to limitations and restrictions on powers given to governmental branches. So some of those amendments, the First Amendment is the freedom of religion. The Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment is protection from unreasonable search and seizure. The Fifth Amendment is protection to life, liberty, and property. And then we have states' rights powers, the 10th Amendment. So occasionally you'll have a high-profile case go to the Supreme Court or something like that, and if it can be found that the law of the Constitution was not followed, then the case gets dropped. So that, these amendments are constantly challenged. Here are the two political parties, American political parties. There are two major national political parties, the Republican and Democratic political parties, and they contest for positions of power in the federal, state, and municipal elections. Each party represents a political ideology, approach, or attitude towards managing the country, solving its problems, and planning for the future. And then, of course, we have, this is the federalist system. The national government has jurisdiction over these areas to provide an army and a navy. So the president is like the commander-in-chief over the army, and in his cabinet are the heads of the departments of defense and homeland security and so on. The national government is the Congress. One of the powers of the Congress is to declare war. The president isn't allowed to declare war. If the president does something like that, he can be impeached and perhaps even arrested. It's the legislature or the Congress that declares war, but the president has authorization to command the army, basically. Make treaties with other nations, trade deals and other forms of treaties. Conduct foreign relations, again, to make deals with foreign countries. Coin money, print money, and set interest rates, and many other things, right? State government regulate commerce or trade within the state, intrastate commerce, establish local governments, administer elections. Again, it's the states that hold elections to elect a representative of the party, and then when you have a popular vote in an election, basically the party that has the most number of wins or representatives can then put their party leader into the president's office. Okay, but it's the states that are responsible for that. And then health, welfare, education. These are state powers as well. The federal government is not supposed to really get involved with that. And then you have these combined powers in between. So in the American Federalist system, there are three levels of government: federal, which is nation state, and then local, municipal, city. The local government's duties are commonly split between county and municipal. If it's not a city, it's a county. In almost all cases, executive and legislative officials are elected by a plurality of vote of citizens by district. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of the lesson. I'll run out of time in a few minutes. So I just want to show you this diagram. We won't talk about the presidents tonight. We'll talk about it next month. But here are the three branches of government: the legislature, Congress, and Senate. Well, the Congress is the Senate and the House of Representatives. The executive is the president, the vice president, and his cabinet, or his or her cabinet. And then the judicial is the court system. What does all of that mean? and then independent agencies as well. So the legislative branch, this is called the Capitol Building, or the building on Capitol Hill, Capitol Building, right? And this is where Congress and Senate work. It's a very iconic, popular symbol here, this building. The legislative branch is made up of Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. Together they make laws, plan and approve budget, have the power to declare war, and the power to impeach or remove members of the government. We had an impeachment this year. It passed the House of Representatives, and it almost passed the Senate. Very close. Legislative members operate from the House chamber on Capitol Hill. So this is Capitol Hill here. The judicial branch is what comprises the country's courts, with the Supreme Court as the nation's highest court. Members of the judiciary are appointed by the executive branch and approved by the legislative branch. So when the president takes power, the new incumbent president takes power, one of the things that he or she tries to do is put their appointed people into the Supreme Court and judiciary. They interpret the law. Legislature passes laws, and then the judiciary interprets the law and says whether or not it's constitutional. And again, they have political swing. They can prioritize and mandate basically certain laws over others, basically. So it's this is why the executive branch can nominate, try to appoint these justices, but the legislature can then vote to have them appointed or not. This is part of the checks and balances system, the regulation on executive power. They don't want one person, one party to have all of the power. So the power is divided up among all of these houses here, and then you have the two-party members. Sometimes cooperating with each other, most of the time opposing each other, though. This branch exists to resolve disputes relating to governmental policies, repealing proposed laws. So if a law gets passed, the Supreme Court can cancel it. The executive branch is the office of the president and vice president and cabinet members. The executive branch also includes different federal departments, such as the Department of State and Treasury. The president and his cabinet operate out of the Oval Office in the White House, and then these are the cabinet members here: Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State of Defense and Homeland Security, the Attorney General. So the president is the head of the executive branch of the government, while the legislative branch drafts laws and bills. It is the office of the president that makes them official by signing them into law or vetoing them, refusing them. So these are the independent agencies. We have NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Agency, the Federal Reserve Bank, the U.S. Post Office, the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA. These are independent agencies. They operate with their own appointed leaders. There's not much that the legislature and executive branch can do much about these types of agencies here. So that's all the time I have tonight. I had a lot more to talk about with with regard to the history of the country and the succession of American presidents. You can look forward to that in another lesson. To get more information about future lessons, to get the slides of this lesson, the worksheet, etc., join this WeChat group. To support my work, share this with your friends and colleagues. Share the knowledge, okay? Next week will be Astronomy Part 2. We did Astronomy Part 1 several weeks back. We'll be doing Science and Astronomy Part 2 next week. Of course, I'll see you on Friday at the Jongnan Center, as I always do. Thank you for joining me tonight, and I'll see you in another lesson. Bye for now.